Ackerman had been presiding Radio France International, and Ms. Ackerman is very much familiar with Russian propaganda machinery. She's very much familiar with the old Soviet propaganda, and today she's a co-founder of the civil NGO in France, which is called European Forum for Ukraine, which unites not only French intellectuals but also intellectuals from the United Kingdom, from Germany, from some other countries, to unite their support to Ukraine. You're welcome, Ms. Galina. Good afternoon. If you won't object, I'll speak Russian, although I understand Ukrainian. Unfortunately, I cannot speak good Ukrainian, and I believe that it's better to speak the language which is in which I have good command. I was requested to discuss the topic of Mistrals and how this topic is perceived in France. Those contracts were concluded not by the current French government. They were concluded by the Nicolas Sarkozy administration, and when he was the president, and when Monsieur Fillon was the prime minister, and at that time the perception of and vision of Russia in the entire Western world was very much different from today's. Even the procedure of the contract conclusion was rather long. It had started back in 2007, before even the war with Georgia. The Russian-Georgian War. The contracts were finally signed after the Russian-Georgian War, but again, I will repeat my message that among the French administration, I know this from Bernard Kouchner, the then foreign minister of France. Nevertheless, despite the Georgian war, there was still a perception of Russia as an ally of France. There was a perception of Russia in the light of hope for the future, of expectation for the future, and because at that time the president of the country was Vladimir Medvedev, and there was Putin remained in shadow at that time. And at that time, this was the French administration, and not only the French administration. This is also true for the entire Europe, for the United States. And despite the Russian-Georgian War, Dmitry Medvedev was perceived as more up-to-date leader, a more civilized leader who employed Twitter. Dmitry Medvedev had no relations with KGB, had no KGB background, and he was perceived as up-to-date leader. And despite the fact that the Russian-Georgia war revealed the real face of the Russian Federation, of the Russian leadership, nevertheless, the Europe did not believe into this real face, but they took into consideration that relative liberalization, intellectualization, so to say, the revival of Russian elites scientific elites. I just try to understand and to explain to you the reasons, the underlying reasons of this friendly perception of Russia. I would like to remind you the general situation in Europe when Putin was substituted by Medvedev, and later when there was a decision between them two that Putin would come later despite the fact of the real voting. And for the West, it was a real shock when Putin returned to power. But it seems to me that always in politics there is a big portion of psychological perception. When the coming back of Putin took place, when the situation in Russia has changed radically, because you should keep in mind that alongside with the processes in Ukraine, there are very frightening processes in Russia itself. The West had been, so to say, digesting, had been perceiving all these changes with much difficulties. After the Cold War, the entire generation was brought up, which never witnessed that Cold War. And it became rather difficult for us to understand that that country, which we used to visit quite often, which we respected and admired, that that country is becoming more aggressive and that it is changing negatively. And today, the French government is facing very complicated psychological and economic and political dilemma. Once again, the contracts were signed, the Mistrals are built, and the Russian sailors are undergoing training on these ships, and at this very moment, the annexation of Crimea happens. And of course, the logic in this situation requires to disrupt the contracts, to stop the procedure of selling these Mistrals. But we live in society which proclaims democratic values, but at the same time we live in the consumption society, and this society itself requires from the administration that they should ensure economic prosperity, and the French government has rather low popularity among their own public. The public support of President Hollande is less than 20% of population. If Hollande is supported by less than 1/5 of the country's population, while the quota of population votes for the National Front to the European Parliament. These National Front parties, they are pro-Putin party. So that then in this situation, the suspension of the contract threatens to French economy. This is unemployment. This is the loss of future contracts. This is the huge economic and political losses for the government. Then, in this situation, when democratic organizations like my organization, some other NGOs, we oppose this transaction, but the France itself is unable to resolve this problem, and this is one very important thing which should be clearly understood by other people. Now I can tell you a rather old story, which is probably now not a secret. Some years ago, in the top circles of French administration, there were voices raised against this contract on Mistrals. At that time, the French administration had the position like that. If we do not sell Mistrals, then the Dutch or the Spanish will sell the same Mistrals, while Russia will receive the helicopter carriers anyway. France is not an exclusive manufacturer of those ships, and this was the approach.
If Ukrainian government wants somehow to try to turn back the direction for those ships, which in October must be given to Russia, and they are still there in France, it seems to me that Ukrainian government should lobby a development of a united position of Europe on this issue for France not to be a lone country which suffers damages, economic losses if that contract will not materialize. There must be some economic sanctions, and the third level is not introduced. And France announced that if there are sanctions which prohibited to sell that weapons, then of course it will be its France will be free. Or there should be a policy, as it was suggested several times, that for those ships to be bought by NATO, a port, and NATO should buy those ships from France or some other countries. So, in other words, it seems to me that under this difficult economic situation for France, when National Front becomes very strong and they openly work with Russia, up to that representative of National Front, and there were observers during the referendum in Crimea, and representatives from National Front, they have regular meetings with Russian leadership. In France, there is an internet channel, pro-Russia TV, and there is the channel of Russian of that National Front. It is paid by France, and there are some French leaders which have direct links with Russia, like Jacques Sapir, and he's a known economist. He's close contacts with National Front. So, in other words, our internal situation is such that I believe that without a European and Euro-Atlantic solidarity on the issue of Mistral, this problem, despite the fact that, yes, there are some legal legal instruments which would allow to stop that contract. But the whole set of concrete political circumstances makes it very difficult. This is what that description, that analysis, which I'm ready to offer to you, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your structured argument position, which explains a lot. That's an answer for. We have some questions here. Please introduce yourself. Vasily Ponomarev from Kharkov. France, does it tell to Europe and to the world about its position that they don't want, like, let others die? It will be cheaper for economy of France. On the other hand, you said that all mass media in France is pro-Russian. Are you trying to filter Goebbels' TV? No, you see, your comments are very direct. French press is not pro-Russian in its majority. The press is neutral, more or less neutral, or it's pro-Ukrainian, or at least it's anti-Putin. French press is quite strong, and I can tell you from my own experience, because they invite me quite often to different channels. There are information programs, but they always try, and talk shows also, they try to stick to a principle of objectivity. In case of Ukrainian-Russian conflict, of course, that's like a joke, and because it's like a caricature. They say you stand for Ukraine, and that they invite the press secretary of Russian embassy, and we start yelling at each other in alive. There are some pro-paid propagandists of Russian position, and they belong to that. They belong to those people who are invited for radio and TV. Because in principle, in France, there are not many people who are ready and who can clearly explain anything. When there was a situation in Crimea, there was a day when I was on 5 TV channels, and all the rest who could say something about that, they were also in demand. But there is quite a stupid situation. I don't speak about talk shows when they want to have two positions and contradictory positions. But in terms of, there is a BFM channel, information channel, and they're allowed to invite for 3-4 minutes to give comments during news. So for 1 hour they invite me, and I tell them what I tell them, and for the next hour they invite someone who says that in Ukraine there are fascists and everything is under control of the right sector. I don't know what happens to the people when during 1 hour they receive one point of view, and during the next hour they receive a different point of view, completely opposite. But once again, I would like to repeat that there are pro-paid, small internet and other magazines or sites. There are a lot of trolling and spam, but to say that French press stands for Putin's Russia, I cannot say that. STV channel. Yesterday in France, activists were in Paris against Mistral, selling Mistral data to Russia. What will be losses of France if France cancels that contract? In real money, how much will that be? And how difficult it will be for France? There were protests against Mistral, but I have to tell you that honestly, that is not a topic which is discussed in media and which worries, which is of concern for French people. In general, it's a pity, I can say, and that is one of the reasons why we set up that organization, European Forum for Ukraine. Ukraine is quite far away and marginal issue for French people, because it's to some extent it's Ukraine is a terra incognita for France, and I believe that the majority of French people, they don't have any clear idea in their head. They don't understand where it happens and who are those Russian-speaking people of Ukraine and what they want, or etc. People very often judge very primitively. I remember once I was returning from some TV channel in a taxi, and a taxi man, a young man, that was right after annexation of Crimea, after the referendum. He told me, and that TV channel paid for the taxi. He knew that he was taking me back from that TV channel, and he told me, what was it about? Why did you were you invited? I told them it's about Crimea. What he said? Why they worry about the Crimea? Because there were people participating in the referendum, and people have the right to choose for that. Why they are so unhappy? So I talked to him for 5 minutes, and finally he realized that he had realized that it's quite different from what he knew. But to understand, you need to want to understand that. That is one of the topics. Like all Western TV, French TV is not different from all the rest. Everything is brief, always without a real story of the issue. Today we speak about Crimea. Tomorrow we'll speak about Syria, and then Iraq, then World Cup. And all the war in Ukraine goes on, and there are victims every day. But they get used to that. So there can be a very short line. And to say that the issue of Mistral and that people and to say that people understand how dangerous these ships are, that it allows, for example, to attack Odessa or Mykolaiv or Kherson from the sea. That is people feel that it's very far and it's very abstract for them. And from time to time, there are some additional pacifying explanations, like, yes, if they don't order 2 more ships, maybe we'll not give them all technology, etc. So there are some pseudo appeasing elements. Nobody told them that they will not be used in the Black Sea. Maybe they will go to the Far East. In other words, we are in the situation when, once again, it's quite difficult to deliver that normal point of view that supplying these ships can, at some moment, they safeguard can bring additional real threat to Ukrainian-Russian war. It's very difficult to reach people with this message because there is no real understanding in French media that this war is happening now because they speak about separatists. Oh yes, Russians gave them something. Putin is playing the role of a peacekeeper at the same time. So I would say it's a principally different war when the country which leads the war at the same time is yells to all in all international offices they would like to get peace and they are ready for negotiations, etc. And humanitarian measures, and we receive refugees and orphans. You know the situation from inside. You see what's happening in fact, but believe me that for a common French man, unfortunately, like for a common resident of any European country, except maybe the countries which are on the border with Ukraine, and they understand more. All of these things are far away for them. And for example, there is a war in Syria, and it's far away. 120,000 people were killed, and about 1 million of refugees. But that continues somehow, and nobody took decisive measures to stop that war. This is a real problem. We do not succeed to really make people interested in what is happening in Ukraine. So there is no understanding that if that situation continues in Ukraine, that sooner or later that will be a threat to the world, to Europe. I hope that sooner or later we'll continue and we'll try to inform on that opinion. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have the next speaker, and I suggest that we will